Listen to the river, does it make you wonder how anything could ever stand still? First lightning and then thunder, the kiss and the rain, love, feel the thrill. I only want you, I only want you, I want what we had. I only want you, I only want you, it's as simple as that.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee with your host, Rick Alexander. That was intro music was by Brittany Taylor, Barbell Brittany, on Instagram. Go ahead and give her a follow. Check out all of her cool music, nutrition coaching, and everything else that she does. Super creative, super cool person. I have just poured myself a full cup of single origin Fathom coffee, and they're not sponsoring the show, but they are keeping my brain cells going while I record it. And so for that, today, they get a shout out. Check them out at fathomcoffeevb.com or just Google it. You'll figure it out. Oh man, so here's the thing. Yesterday I was driving in a car and I talked to somebody and I said, can we stop at Starbucks? We were on our way to the range. I'm in the military, for you guys that don't know, getting out. I'm on my way to the range and I said, hey, can we stop at Starbucks? And 2 out of 4 people in the car said, I don't want anything when we came to the drive-thru. And then I thought, what kind of psychopath doesn't drink coffee? But apparently they're out there. I actually named this show Morning Coffee because I wanted it to be the one thing you couldn't go without starting your day with. But apparently there's psychopaths everywhere. So for those of you that don't like the real thing and don't like the show, you and I have nothing in common. All right. So today what I want to talk to you about is gratitude. And quite honestly, gratitude is something that I'm hearing way too often, especially in the self-help community. Like you always hear, you got to have this attitude of gratitude. And we sort of become desensitized to it. But here's a really interesting thing. So on Lionheart Radio, I have the final question I ask all of the guests is, if you could give blanket advice, or guaranteed everybody in the world would hear it, what would you tell people? I found that these really driven people, these elite people, they don't always have the advice that you think they'd have. Like a lot of times you would think that these people have advice like the fucking Nike slogan, like just do it, just get out there and make it happen. And quite honestly, that's almost never the case. People have some really like inflective moments. And I remember I was talking to Brandon Lilly. He is a elite powerlifter, one of the strongest people that I've ever talked to in my entire life. And this guy is head to toe covered in tattoos, huge beard, just a really gnarly looking dude. And I couldn't wait to hear what kind of like motivation advice he would give. And so when I got to that final question, I said, okay, blanket advice, everybody in the world will hear it. What would you tell people? And he looked at me and he was like, go home and thank your parents for raising you. Tell your mom and your dad that you love them. Give them a hug and say thank you. And I just remember sitting there like, what in the hell? Like, you could say anything. You could say jack more weight or give them some kind of periodization advice or tell them to buy your book. There's a lot of things that you could have said, and I don't think hug your mom and dad would have been one of them. But that speaks to his character, and I think more often than not, that speaks to a lot of elite level athletes' character. This life, this opportunity that we get, it's not long, fam. Like, we're not fucking here for a long time. And if you're listening to this, then you have more access to things than anybody in history has ever had. And I know that you're so sick of hearing that because I sort of am. It's like you have more, shit on your smartphone in your pocket than but it's true, man. Like you and I, we're not starting in equal places. No matter how much the world might want to regulate equality, you and I are never going to start in the same place. We're going to have different amounts of money. We're going to have different intellect. We're going to have different values. We were raised by different people in different places. It's so hard to regulate equality. It's just not going to happen. But the fact that you and I can have this conversation, that you can listen to this, means that you and I both have more upward mobility in the world than has ever previously existed. And that's something that we don't ever actually think about, right? Because if you were a baby boomer, your upward mobility was, you were basically in the class you were in. And now maybe more people made more money back then as far as having stable jobs. And, that was the birth of the American dream, yada, yada. But man, like as appreciative as I am for that time, I'm really stoked I can buy $100 microphone and talk to thousands, if not millions of people sitting in this here recording studio. And that's the opportunity that you and I both have. And just the opportunity to wake up every day and give it another shot, it's worth mentioning it. It's worth thinking about. Because when you sort of change your mind and you sort of, instead of saying, how can I get through this, but thank you for this, you become result oriented, right? And so that's something that I talk about all the time. Like when you go through a really hard situation in life, conversation that you have with yourself is going to determine the outcome of that really hard time. So if the conversation you have with yourself is, why me, or why did this happen to me, you're going to play the victim, and you're going to live in this victimhood mentality. Now, if the conversation you have is, why is this happening for me, right? And why is this happening for me instead of to me? And you believe it, you're going to find a reason, and that reason is going to be significant. It's not going to be insignificant. That reason is going to matter. It's going to make you a better human being going forward. So one of the things I give in my talk, one of the things I tell people is like, imagine this. There's 50 people in a bank, right? And the bank robber walks in and he fires one shot and hits you in the arm. A lot of people in this world are going to say, why me? There were 50 people in there, 100 fucking arms, and I got the one round that guy fired. I'm so unlucky. Now, the flip side is that people are dying every single day. As I'm taking this breath right now, somebody is taking their last, right? And so the attitude of, why is this happening for me? It says, if that bullet would have landed 6 inches to the left, I'd be dead right now. There would be no more me. But there's some reason. Why did this happen for me? There's something that I have to give to the world. And I've brought this mentality into really small, like in the middle of an ultra marathon, I've used this mentality to get through some kind of thing that went wrong. And I've used it when I've gone through really big, tragic things like breakups and deaths. And I found, it can be easy to think that this mentality might break down, but if you can find out why this is happening for you, and you can find gratitude in that moment and for that thing, and it's not this insignificant shit that you just say to yourself, like, you need to be serious about this. You need to actually think about why these things might be happening for you, because that reason is your way out. And once you find why this thing is happening for you, and you can be truly thankful for it, that's where you're going to make your money. That's how you figure out what your next move is. That's what's going to get you out of this tough situation. I've told a lot of people before, but maybe you didn't listen to all of my shows, which I forgive you for. In the middle of my first 200-mile race, I developed high altitude pulmonary edema. Now, essentially, what happens there is your lungs fill up with fluid, and they have trouble expanding because that pleural cavity, that sac, has so much fluid in it, the lungs can't expand. Now, I live in Virginia Beach, and I raced in Lake Tahoe, California, and Nevada. So this 200-mile race took place between 5,000 and 10,000 feet of elevation. I couldn't train elevation on the East Coast. It was like the one thing I couldn't train, and it was the one thing that caught me. Just like anything you do in life, if Murphy has a chance to screw you over, he will. So basically what happened was I got to Tahoe. By 80 miles in, my lungs had filled up with so much fluid that I no longer could run at like a good pace, the pace that I was planning on running at. And this is interesting because as an endurance athlete, one of the things I never face is being out of breath. But because my lungs couldn't expand, I couldn't even run for 30 feet without getting doubled over and just trying to figure out how to catch my breath. And I realized how much trouble I was in because I still had 130 miles left in the race, 125, something like that. And God, I remember I just sat on the side of the trail for a minute. I felt sorry for myself for 1 minute, but I learned this mentality, thank God, right before the race. And I thought, why is this happening for me? Like, really, I need to figure out why this is happening for me, because 4 people actually ended up getting pulled from the race for that. And I'm a medic. I'm well aware of the dangers of high altitude pulmonary edema. I knew if I talked to anybody in the medical staff, they were going to pull me right away. But I also knew I could probably monitor it myself. And, I didn't drive to fly to Lake Tahoe to come home empty-handed. So I was going to finish, but I had to, me getting through it, my way out was contingent on figuring out why this was happening for me and not to me. And I sat there for a minute, I sat on a rock, and I thought, you know what I do in every fucking race? I start off too fast. Every one, I start off too fast, and I die halfway through. And I know if I start off too fast in a 200-miler, and I die only 120 miles in, man, I don't know if I could get through 80 miles. So why is this happening for me? It's slowing me down. It's forcing me to run at a pace that I can maintain for 205 miles. That's got to be it. And it was literally that simple. And for the rest of my race, I was so thankful for this fluid in my lungs that had me doubled over constantly, because I knew, one, I couldn't stay at aid stations very long if they were high in altitude. I was like, I got to get down. There was no sitting around thinking about quitting for me. Like, I had to get the hell out of there. It was life or death. And then, so this is a small situation, but like, God, it was my way out. I was in this situation that seemed so awful, and it's a physical situation. It's not a big diagnosis or a death or anything, but it's just a perfect example of how you can use this, because I became so thankful in that moment for this, cosmic shit that had been handed to me. And it ended up being my way out, ended up being my salvation in this whole entire thing. And so I would ask you today to think about what it is that's going wrong in your life and why that might be happening for you, and what you can do with that knowledge.